Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me, whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording. Thank you for watching. A little bit of a more chill pre-stream music today, just to kind of get us, I guess, in the mood for a more chill class today. We are talking about developer tools today, which I think this module in general is relatively simple, right? Like there are some concepts that we want to kind of wrap our heads around as we are, approaching the idea of developer tools and how all this stuff works. But just in general, right, what we want to be able to get out of web developer tools is an understanding of what these different things do or what we can do with these different things, I think is a better way to put that. And I'll basically give you the cheat mode at the end of this that basically does everything for you. And so we are operating in the browser today. I'm operating in Chrome, but if you're I'm operating in Opera actually. But if you're in Chrome or you're in Firefox or you're in Microsoft Edge or regardless of whatever you're in, you're going to have a similar experience with similar things. So we're just on the Cleveland Community College website here, and we're going to just go through the different tabs in the Inspect Element tool, right? Because, we see the Inspect Element tool, right? If I right click here and go to Inspect Element, or I hit Control-Shift-C in Opera, I get the Inspect Element tool brought up. And so this is really what we're talking about here when we're talking about dev tools for our purposes here, right? And so we have these different tabs across the top. And in general, right, when we're just doing basic stuff, we stick to two tabs, right? We stick to the Elements tab, which is the first tab here, and we use the Console tab. And the Console tab looks like it's having some fun as a result of some ad blocker stuff going on there. So that's pretty cool. We'll just have to ignore that when we get to the Console tab. But we do some stuff in these different tabs in previous courses, right? Like, we kind of looked at it when we were in CTI 110. We kind of looked at the Elements tab here, which we're on now, right? It shows us our HTML markup. It shows us our CSS. It shows us our box model down here at the bottom, so we can see the different boxes. And if we click on the different elements in our page, for example, if we scroll through here and we find It's all collapsed by default. Or we can just right click here and just inspect that element in particular. It'll take us there and we can see, okay, if I hover over that H1, we can see the orange block that pops up here is the margin. There's margin left there. Whereas the blue box, that's the content box. And so we can see that when we hover over here, or we can see that when we go down here and we look at our box model diagram here in the bottom. And these are things that we've kind of looked at before, and I know we've kind of looked at things like changing these elements before. Right, so if I double click inside of here, I can edit this box, and I can change creating to making. Well, that didn't quite work out there. I must have missed a keystroke there. Looks like I hit caps lock instead of A. So if we said making, right, and that changes it on the page. And this takes advantage of the way that the browser loads HTML and the browser loads CSS, right? So this is just a local change. And so we can make changes in the HTML, we can make changes in the CSS, and that's just going to impact the way that it looks in the browser currently. Right, so I just changed CSS there. I changed the font color to red instead of being white. And so again, this doesn't change it on the website, right? It just changes it in the browser. This is a way, though, that a lot of people will try to take advantage of website content. They'll go in and they'll edit in the elements panel here. They'll edit some text or they'll edit some CSS. Then they'll take a screenshot of it. Right, and it looks like that's what it is. Because at the time that they took the screenshot of it, well, it looked pretty legit. Right, but if I refresh my page here, we see it just goes back to normal. Now, one of the things that we can do that we don't really talk about a lot is that, one of the things that causes us problems, right, is if we need to check and see what something's doing on hover. Right, for example, this navigation element here, if we look at it and we hover over it, we see there's this green line that sort of animates in underneath it. Well, we have this :HOV button, and that gives us the option to force state. So if we want to focus hover on hover elements, we can click hover. Now in this case, we are focusing it on this H1 here, which doesn't have a hover state. But if we take that off and we say, let's inspect this element here, this button, and let's force the hover state on that, well, then it draws the line underneath it. And when it draws the line underneath it, it shows it in the CSS here, the CSS that it used to draw the line. You just have to go through and find it and read it and see what it does. It looks like it, probably this after here, from the looks of it, which if I can get my browser to cooperate with me here, there we go. We can see this after here has this different background color. So if I took this and made it something like magenta to where it stood out a little bit more, then we can see that green line turns to magenta, right? And in turn, all of the green lines turn to magenta because that same class is applied to all of these buttons. Right, and so that's how we can force that hover state to happen. If we can do the same thing for links, if we want to force a visited state on links, focus an active state on links or a focus state on links, there's different things that we can focus in here. And that's something that we don't really talk about a whole lot, is that focus, that toggle element state button. And so there's a lot of stuff that you can do here, right? Like you can see some event listeners that are involved on the page, right? Like we can see here on DOM content loaded, there are certain things that are done, right? We have this bit of JavaScript. We have a few bits of JavaScript here that pop up in the sources panel. So we will go back to that source. We'll come back here when we get ready to go to the to look at the sources panel, but we have these different bits of JavaScript that load on DOM content loaded. And some of these things have JavaScript that is associated with them. Some of them do not. Right, but it looks like most of them do. A lot of that's primarily going to be from WordPress. But we can see all the JavaScript that loads when these events happen, which is pretty neat. Right, so this is telling us a lot of stuff, right? It's giving us the ability to make some quick edits without having to go back to our code window or render any new, website code or do a lot of big stuff. Right, we can just make some quick edits here, see what it looks like, and if we don't like it, well, we just refresh our browser and we go back. If we do like it, then we can copy and paste it into our code base and it'll work. Right, because we can expect that it would work the same way if we put it in our code base as it would if it were, here in the inspect element. We also have the ability, like we looked at, to look at the element states here, turn those on and off. Look at our event listeners, see how those work out. There's also some accessibility here. I don't really necessarily recommend using this accessibility tree unless you want to get in the weeds with it. There is another way that we can look at accessibility that we'll look at a little bit later on that I think is a whole lot easier. Right, but one of the best ways to kind of get attuned to the elements panel is to just use the elements panel. Right, get in there, play around with it, use it, see what you can do with it, see what you can kind of figure out with it. That's going to be the way that you really figure things out. And it's really going to be the way that you really figure things out for all of the stuff with DevTools. It's just getting your hands on it, playing with it, right? You're not going to hurt anything because you're not changing the code in any sort of saved format. It's just temporary. It's just in browser local storage. So any changes you make get immediately reverted back. So there's nothing really to worry about there, right? Like we can deal with that and we can play with it and figure things out and move on. And so there are a couple things here that aren't in regular DevTools that you'll learn about in a future course, right? There's components and profiler here. So we won't look at those. Those are specifically React DevTools. I also have an ad block dev tool here, which wouldn't be relevant. But I'd like to take us pretty quickly through console, network, sources, just kind of we'll have a longer look at console here. We'll have a quick look at sources, a quick look at network, a quick look at performance and memory and application and security. But then we'll have a longer look at Lighthouse when we get to that point. And so the console is something that we've played with before as well. And the console is pretty nifty. And so typically when we use the console, and I will clear it here just so we can have something a little cleaner. When we use the console, we're typically doing it for troubleshooting, right? Like those of you in Web 2.15 might see me put console.log in some JavaScript and, maybe put a string of text in there like hello world. Something like that. Maybe in some JavaScript, and then I'll say something like, well, let's see if this function's even triggering. And so then I know if hello world shows up in my console like so, then I know that function's triggering. I know the problem is somewhere else. So oftentimes we use the console here to do a little bit of troubleshooting, and I'll try to keep clearing it just so I'm not sure what exactly is causing the issues there. We'd have to dig into that a little bit deeper. But we can also do other stuff with this console, right? So we can have things triggered to it. Looks like maybe every time it restarts the video, it's trying to get some kind of information from, yeah, something like that. Trying to get some kind of information from Vimeo and it's stopping it. Let's see here. We can stop that video from running with our elements panel. So why don't we do that really quickly? We can find the hero video wherever it is in here. We'll just have to look for it here. Where is my hero video? Surely it is in here somewhere. I might have to expand something. Here's video container. And there is my video wall. What I would probably want to do here is see video wall. Let's expand that. There's my iframe with my video. So we can take we can say data loop false. And let's see here. What would be the I might want to change like autoplay to 1 there. Or something. All right, let's just change the URL a little bit. I will say data ready false here as well. All right, just to try to stop it from doing that. Since it's an iframe, we're probably going to have some problems doing that, but it's fine. Yep, we immediately get it. I guess I could just delete it. So let's just delete the whole thing. If it doesn't want to be friendly with us, we'll just delete it. Okay. Now. So one of the things that I like to do with something like this is if I'm working on a page and I want to say like, well, where are all my paragraphs or where are all my links? And I don't want to do something that would permanently impact my website or add something into my website. Well, I can come in here and I can add JavaScript here. That would show me like, oh, here are all your links. Here are all your buttons. Right, so I could just write some code here. And we do this basically just like we would write code in a JavaScript file. Right, we're just writing it here in the console window instead. And so I can even create a variable and I can say something like let headings equal document dot query selector all h1. And so this will return all of my headings on the page. So if I console.log headings, it remembers that from where I put it in there just now. Right, it's going to remember that until I refresh the site. So it'll show me my node list, which is my array of different H1 headings on the page. And I only have one here, which is the hero heading, the creating a pathway thing here. So if I wanted to do something else like let links equal document dot query selector all A. Now I can console.log links. And we can see there are a bunch of them. Right? Bunch of links here. And it's been returned in this array of links. And so it's kind of hard to go through this and see what's going on there. But what if I wrote some JavaScript that said something like, for link of links, link.style.border equals 2px solid magenta. Right, and just wrote a little for loop here that would go over my page, that would iterate over my page, iterate over that query selector all list of links, and just put a little magenta margin around all of them. What happens then? Well, if we look at our website now, we can see anything that's in here as an anchor tag, as an A tag, now has a little box around it. So that's a link, those are links. And so this allows me to look at my page and identify all the links in my page. Or I can look at any page, right, and identify all the elements of a certain type on a page. And this is going to help me as I'm kind of going through and seeing like, okay, what have they done here? What can I determine here? Or how did I do this? Did I use links? What did I do? Right, so I can just scroll through this site really quickly now that I have all of the links outlined and just see everything that's a link on a page. And this is actually something that's helped me write like browser extensions before, right? Like I have a browser extension on my browser that I use that follows a similar principle where it's looking for all the links on a page, but it's making sure all the links that I have in my online classes go to an external window. Open up in a new tab, basically. And so if they don't open up in a new tab, I can highlight them in the browser so I know, okay, I got to go back and fix that. Right, so we could do something like that here, right? So we could say something like, for length of links, if link dot, what is it? ATTR, I think. ATTR. Or maybe link dot has attribute. If link dot, how did I do it? Yeah, it's that .attr target blank, I believe. .attr target, comma blank. If it's that, then we will give it a link dot style dot background color equals yellow. So I don't know what, if anything, here will be an external link, but I guess we're going to find out. So let's just copy that. Oh, I think I want to underscore blank here as well. For link of link, if link. Or actually that's ATTR's jQuery, not regular vanilla JavaScript. How did I do that? Doggone it. Well, anyway, that's It's one of those things where, you know, your brain works at one time and then it quits. You know, I write in too many different programming languages in a day. So we'll just move on from there. I mean, you can kind of see the idea behind it. Like, we could take some time and look it up and actually work with it, but it's not really going to give us much of a difference. So we can see that there, right? So we have a lot of options here, and even the browsers know, right, that the console is powerful because they give you this little warning message here at the top, right? If anybody asks you to put anything in here, don't do it. Right? Because that could trigger other pages, that could trigger downloads, that could trigger whatever, right? Because if we were to use something like the open method, right, I could say something like, I'm like, oh yeah, just go in and type in, say, window.open https://www.google.com. Right, we'll put a nice regular link in there. Well, if I run that, it's going to open up a new tab and take me to Google. Right, or window.open, maybe something like dev.to, just so you can see that it is opening a new browser window with that item in it. Right, so there's things that could be done through the console that are kind of powerful, right, that could be exploited if, you know, someone were of the mind to. We want to make sure that we're being careful when we're using the console here. So everything else I want to kind of just go through really quickly and just let you all know what's going on in these tabs. So we'll go into the sources tab here, and basically the sources tab is essentially a list of files that load when the page loads, right? So we can kind of go back to the idea of, well, how does a browser load a web page where it loads the HTML first and then it makes requests for all of these other files that are inside of the HTML. And so this is where all that stuff ends up. These are all the other files that are inside the HTML. These are JavaScript files. These are image files. These are external CSS files. These are local files. These are plugin files. Right, but they're all the files that load when the page loads. And so this is actually sort of a way, you know, depending on how you do it, you know, you can get a bit of a deeper look at some of the code that's involved in running the site, right? Like, for example, here, the ai.ocelotbot.com, right? The little chat box that's at the bottom of the screen, that's the Ocelot bot. And so we can see that it loads a little bit of CSS there, a little bit of static CSS, and we can see kind of what that does. So this looks like the animation for what happens when you hover it. Looks like some colors and some margin and some, you know, got some form stuff in there. If I look at this other file here, this other file that might be a JS file. Let's have a look. Yep, that's a JS file. That's JavaScript. And so you can see a lot of the JavaScript, and that's a huge switch there if it's doing all of that, using all those cases. But we can see variables for color here, right? Like we have all these hex codes here. These are variables for color. Just a lot of stuff going on in here. And this is a JavaScript file that's loading when the website loads for the chatbot. And so you can kind of come in here and kind of look at it and see what's going on. And it's not a file that you would normally get if you were to just look at the source code, right? It might be a linked file in there, but if it's a linked file in there, you're going to have to do some more digging. You're going to have to find it. And so we also see, we have usetypekit.net here. So these are font. So this is a font that's being used in the site here. And one of the interesting things about that is if we wanted this font, we could get it. Right, so that gives us that font. Since that's coming from typekit.net, it's going through their CDN, so there might be something a little bit weird about how they're sending it. What we can see here, we have these different fonts that are used in the site. And we have a little CSS file here that's telling us, that's giving us all the information about these fonts. And if, you're in the design class, we did web fonts a couple weeks ago. We talked about what all this stuff means and how we work with that. So this is just giving us information about all the web fonts that are being used. There's a Google Tag Manager here for, that's for tracking tags. And here's our video background. Video background, video BG2 on local host, browser.js. So here's some JavaScript code that's requested to run that video player. Right, so there's a lot of stuff here that gets requested. There's a lot of stuff that is on a website that gets requested that you never see or that you'd have to dig for to try to find. And so really the sources panel here is just a good way to where you can look at something quickly and see everything like WP content here. This is where we get into like the base CSS stuff. Uploads here are going to be pictures that are being loaded. Right, these are pictures that are being loaded from the website. So this is another good thing too. Like if you go to a website that doesn't allow you to like right click and download, you get a picture off of it. Well, you can look in the sources panel and you could probably get it from there. Right, it's also showing you these pictures full size too, which is interesting, right? Like that's full size. If we saw that on the website, it's going to be, it's going to be smaller. It's going to be a thumb, right? Like I think it might be, it's one of these to where if you hover over it, then it shows up. I can't remember where it's at. It's on here somewhere. And it might not hover in the mobile view, which is what we're in. So it might go a little big. There it is. Right, so if we hover that image there, it shows us that picture. So it even shows us things that, are hover images. To where if we need to hover over before we see the picture, we get that there as well. Right, so it's a good place to go see that sort of stuff. And again, you're just kind of going through and poking around, seeing what's there, seeing what you can find. Sometimes it's pretty surprising what you can find just looking at the sources and looking at the fonts that have been loaded and seeing, or files that have been loaded rather, and just seeing what's available and seeing what's there and what you actually have access to. It's oftentimes pretty surprising. What you can find. The network tab, which is the next tab, this goes into speed. And so this is more into the speed of the network and how it is routing files. So we're routing files from the server to the browser in a particular way. If I want to here, I can click this record button. Where it looks like it was already recording. I just need to refresh the window. So now we can refresh and we can see it populate. And so this is basically the process during which all of these requests for all of these different files are being made. And you can see where they're at in the page loading. And you can see what it's trying to do. And you can see how it continuously tries to do this beacon for the Vimeo player. And failing when it is blocked by the ad blocker. but you see the different files that are being requested. You're seeing the status, the return status. So if it gets a status 200, that's an okay return. That just means it sends it back. You can see what type of file that it is. You can see which file initiated it. So if it says index, it's the HTML file, but it could be in another file, right? Like snippets.js. Here is a JavaScript file that then imports other files, right? So it imported this isolated-first.jst. And you can see, okay, here's some CSS that's requesting another CSS file. CSS that's requesting another the font document here. CSS that's requesting some images here and font. So not only can we see what's being requested here in the waterfall, when it's being requested in terms of how the site is loaded, right? You can see that the stuff that kind of gets pushed out more to the left here, like this, or rather more to the right here, like this XHR file, gets downloaded later in the waterfall of the site load, right? Whereas the first thing should just be the base document, right? Because that's the HTML file. We can see if we click on it here, we get more information. And this is actually a place where we can get a lot of information and we can learn a lot of things, right? Like we see we get a remote address here. And so if I copy that remote address and paste it into my browser, we can see that gives me a 1003 error, which is direct IP access is not allowed. That's a good thing from our hosting services company there. Helps us prevent some potential issues there. But we can get a lot of information about different files in here. We can see the cookie information, how it's cookieing us when we're coming through. We can find out information about ourselves. Preview here, this is actually, if we look at the preview here, this is actually the site without CSS. So that's an interesting thing to look at because this is the site initially before it gets any requests for any other files. So if you wanted to know what just the HTML of the Cleveland Community College website looks like, this is it. All right, you can see those buttons, they're just regular buttons. All the links, all the headings, where pictures should be, right? Because we haven't requested any files yet. This is the response. So this is after all the files have loaded and propagated their code. This is what you end up with. This is also the same thing that you get when you do the view page source. That's the same thing you get when you look at that. And here in timing, you can see the amount of time that was actually spent doing specific things. So the amount of time that it spent doing DNS lookup or making connections, doing regular connections or secure socket connections. Right? How long we spent sending requests versus how long we spent waiting for things to come back, right? Waiting for a server response. And you can see that waiting for a server response bar there, that's a pretty big bar. But notice here, right, in duration, it's only 133 milliseconds, right? So we're still at a little over a tenth of a second right there in waiting for a response. So even though that bar is long, which makes it seem like, oh, this takes a long time to do, a long time in terms of a website loading is relative, right? So this thing that looks like it takes a long time to do actually took a tenth of a second. Basically a snap there. Download speeds, that's going to be based on my network. So in this case, pretty quick. Right, we can see there's a lot of stuff to download, so download speeds have to go pretty fast. Now I can go up and I can try to throttle my network. So if I click the little Wi-Fi bar looking thing here, or I can go beside it, and I could say, well, what would this look like if I was on slow 3G instead of this fast internet that I'm on? Let's try to run it with that instead and see what it does. So we stop it, we restart it, we refresh. And so this will mimic being on a slow phone connection. And we can see how much longer things are taking here. Taking quite a bit longer, right? And so this is something that we can do to help performance for our website. We can isolate the items that are taking a long time on this mobile simulation. And we can say, well, what can we do to make this a little bit more performant, make this a little bit more faster? Sometimes it's nothing, right? Sometimes it's something, right? We can optimize something, we can do something. In this case, there's not a whole lot we can do. Right, we can still see that like primary DOM content was loaded in 2.5 seconds. And the site finished loading in about 46, 47 seconds. Which all told, especially for slow 3G, still pretty fast. Right, still pretty fast. When we look at performance here, performance works similarly. Right, this is actually a good place where we can identify like maybe huge images that might be causing a problem. Right, so I can hit the record button here and start doing it, making a performance profile of my website. And I can do this for as long or as little of an amount of time as I'd like. So we saw that the network for a 3G connection was able to load the site in about 46, 47 seconds. So I'm going to try to hold this for about 46, 47 seconds until I hit stop. That way I can have a performance profile that would take basically the amount of time, even though we're on no throttling here. It would be similar to the amount of time that it would take to load the mobile site. Just so we can see that in action. And so this here is telling me, so I got frames that were dropped along the way. Right, these dropped frames really came as a result of me stopping the process. But I can basically see how my site loaded and what it looked like at certain times during the process of it loading. And so we can see performance-wise, right, if I go back and look here at the beginning, like if I don't throttle it, like it's basically loaded all the way. So if I use slow 3G here, I can restart it with slow 3G, just so we can see something that's maybe a little bit different. Right, we can see that it's actually causing some problems for my Opera a little bit there. But we can see it still loads up. It's just loading up a little bit differently. It's loading up a little bit slower, right? Like that's a video that's in the background there that's taking some time to load up. And so now it's received the status and it's processing it, and we're actually able to see that, okay, like in the other one, within 5,000 milliseconds it was done, right? But here in this one, within at least 4,000 milliseconds here, nothing's loaded at all. Right, so it took around 4 seconds to even get a response. We got some DOM content loaded here around 5 seconds. And then everything started loading in and it was fine. And so we can see kind of what loaded in at what amount of time. Right, we can see the chatbot here didn't get loaded in until around 3 seconds. CastSender.js here got loaded in at around 4 seconds. And so on and so forth, right? So this is just something that gives you some information about how your website loads and really what takes the most time to load. right? And what we see here a lot of times is if somebody like uses Bootstrap, for example, if they load Bootstrap on their own server and have users download it, Bootstrap is big files, right? Bootstrap contains a lot of big files. So those big files take a long time to download. And so if the Bootstrap files are taking a long time to download, what you might want to do then is to go inside of those Bootstrap files, take out the parts of Bootstrap that you're not using, right? Take out whatever query or whatever CSS sets or rules that are in there that you're not using, and then save that and serve that so it gets done in a little bit of a faster time. And so for the sake of time here, I'm going to skip memory, I'm going to skip application, and I'm going to jump straight to Lighthouse, because Lighthouse is what you all want anyway. Because Lighthouse is basically all of this on easy mode. And so I have a presentation here for Lighthouse that I want to just kind of go over really quickly, and then we'll just get into it. Right, but Lighthouse is all of this on easy mode. Basically with Lighthouse, I can start Lighthouse running, and I just get a report, and it tells me things I've done well and things I've done poorly. Right, so one of the things to remember is that the best way to measure the quality of your website is by knowing how the users use it and how the users think about it. Right? So if your users are good with what you've developed, they're not encountering any issues, it's probably fine. But that's not always something that we get the opportunity to do. And so we have these tools that we can utilize to help us, and some of them we've seen already today with our dev tools. But Lighthouse makes this real easy. Right, so Lighthouse is an automated tool provided by Google. You can even get a Lighthouse extension for Firefox now. It is available as an extension for Firefox, but it's baked into Google and Opera, and I believe Edge as well. Any Chromium-based browser it is baked into. If you're using Firefox, you can get it, but you do have to get it as an extension. But it has audits for multiple categories. It just runs them automatically. You know, the stuff that we were kind of doing there manually and examining and maybe understanding and maybe not, it just does it automatically for us. Right, which is pretty nice. And it assesses 4 criteria: performance, best practices, SEO or search engine optimization, accessibility, and progressive web application ability. Right, and so the first 4 there might be big deals to us as we're developing websites. The last one for a lot of people, just in general, not going to be a huge deal, right? Because PWAs are specific things. And so if you've ever seen a website like Google, which is not Google, but YouTube, which is installable, like you can actually install YouTube to where you can have certain access offline. That's a trait of a PWA, or progressive web application. And so we can add the Lighthouse browser extension for Firefox, or it's already baked into Chrome and Opera and any Chromium-based browser. We can see it's a tab here. And so we can see we've got modes here: navigation, time span, snapshot mode. We'll run navigation first. We can choose to run it on mobile or desktop, and we can select which categories that we want to check. Right? So if we aren't worried about progressive web app because we know it's not a progressive web app, we can uncheck that. I'm going to check them all here to begin with, and I'm just going to click Analyze Page Load, and it's going to start working for me. And so it's just going to load up the page like it normally would. Right? I think we do have it set. We have it set on throttling down there. So we have it set on slow 3G speed throttling. And so we'll change that back. But we can see here, based on what we got a 95 performance score, right? Which is really great. This is a highly performant website based on that information. So I'm just going to go ahead and change that to no throttling while I'm at it here. We see a 95 performance score, a 90 accessibility score, a 75 best practices score, an 83 SEO score, and it's not a PWA, so we're not even going to worry about that. But not only does it tell us what the score is that we got, but it tells us why we got that score. So the first contentful paint, the first rendering of content on our site was within 0.7 seconds. Total blocking time, 0 milliseconds. Speed index, 1.1 seconds. These are all super quick. The largest contentful paint was 1.5 seconds. So the largest thing that it took to render on the site, which is probably the hero video, took 1.5 seconds, which is approaching slow. But remember, too, that was still on 3G throttled. So once we unthrottle it, it might be even better. Now, if we click these links here, we can see how the exact score is calculated. Right, we can also view a tree map and viewing the original trace, which takes us to our performance panel, right? It's just doing this stuff that we were looking at previously. It just does it for us, right? And presents us with the information here. So if you're the one who is doing the analysis of the website for your group project, this is the part that just does it for you, right? So not only that, but it also tells you like some things that you could do to make it better. Right? Reduce unused JavaScript. So it tells you you've got some JavaScript here that's not being used or it's not being used fully. So you might want to get rid of it. And if you do that, that'll save you half a second. Eliminate render blocking resources. Things like typekit. Right, if you do that, it'll save you about 4.4 seconds. Right, so if we did both of those things, right, that would take us from our 1.5 seconds to about, 0.4 seconds or whatever that would have been, right? So takes a quick site, makes it even faster. Some other diagnostics here, like we see some good ideas and we see some kind of critical things here. Accessibility has a 90. One is that buttons do not have an accessible name. That's a big issue here. Since the navigation here uses buttons instead of links, that's a problem. Right? Although it's not the worst thing. Right? We can see here specifically what it's talking about is it looks like the video control pause button, which is weird because that's a hidden button, I believe. Background and foreground colors do not have sufficient contrast. That's a problem in several places. And so we can see that's probably different things, right? It's just something to give you some things to go in there and check. Maybe it's true, maybe it isn't, right? And when you check it, you might discover that, oh yeah, it's not actually a big deal. It was fine. And I'm actually trying to find one of these in the site so we can actually see it. There's that card. And that actually probably is fine. It's probably talking about maybe that caret there against the background, so it's probably fine, right? So that's why we'd want to check things like accessibility. Best practices. Uses deprecated APIs. So that could be a problem, right? Because if you're using old APIs, that could be insecure. Browser errors were logged to the console specifically for Typekit, Piwik, Facebook. And then that's a browser plugin that I wrote, so that doesn't apply. Right, but we can also see the past audits and the things you're doing right. SEO here, links do not have descriptive text. Got 6 examples of that. Links are not crawlable. Got a few examples of that. So if you wanted to make your website even more SEO friendly, this gives you some things that you can look at to fix, and it tells you what and why and how, right? And then the PWA stuff, this is not a PWA. It doesn't register a service worker. It can't be installed. It doesn't have a theme color for the address bar. Right? It's just not a PWA. But if you wanted it to be a PWA, those give you some things that you could do to make it a PWA. So if I wanted to run this again, I can come up here and I can click this clear all. And I can run it again. So let's run it again without it being throttled and see if it changes my score any. It might be basically the same. We'll find out. And so, yeah, it's basically the same there. 93 overall, a little bit more performant, a lot more accessible, actually. Because some of the things that were present in one view are not present in another view. We can also look at it from a mobile perspective here. If we click this mobile button, right, you can see it changes the viewport, treats it like it would if it were on a mobile site. This is mobile site, no throttling. So let's just say like full 5G. And it is lesser performant on mobile, but that's also something that is probably expected, right? We can see the largest contentful paint took 9 seconds on mobile. So that's something that we probably want to address. And we can see some of the issues there when it comes to being related in that. Right, because it talks about serving images in next-gen formats. So things like AVIF would be something that we could use. This would also be another good use case for something like a CDN, like Cloudinary, right? Because Cloudinary can do that manipulation on the fly for you. So if you wanted to make sure that you were serving the quickest image possible, you could use some of the features in Cloudinary to do that. But we can see how the data changes and how the score changes based on different things that you do. And it gives you all of this information here. And all of this information you can go through and you can make notes and you can write things out and you can have a good report or a good analysis of how the website is functioning, some things that you're doing right and some things that you could be doing better and some ways that you could be doing it better, right? Which is pretty cool. And so really that's all that I have for you for today. That's DevTools in a nutshell. So we basically covered everything we needed to cover. I will hold here for just a couple minutes just in case anybody has any questions. With that being said, and not seeing anybody with me here, we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.